Okay, now we're going to go to this. Okay, do you see this, Bruce?
Yep.
Here we go.
So every year is the same but different.
Yeah, what's amazing to me, to Marjorie, is we put the syllabus together 5 years ago, and here we are starting year 6, and the syllabus is still what we're covering. But we cover, because of the way the syllabus is structured, we just cover different things, different emphasis, but the topics haven't changed, which is
Particulars.
yeah. So here the title is Mysticism, where science, art, and spirituality meet. So here's some art here. Here's some science running around here. Here's some biology, and here's Jung over here. So this tries to capture all of these things meeting just as a kickoff. So here we go. Uh, the syllabus, which is here, has these 10 modules. There's an overview side of things, and then we go through, try to have a common foundation. We do science and mysticism in the microcosm. We look at mysticism and poetry and music, mysticism East and West, where we survey a lot of different things. Jung and Pauli, synchronicity, astronomy, cosmology, and the Big Bounce, the start of our universe, astrology, tarot, and I Ching, the labyrinth, and then we conclude with, what did we get out of this? Are there any common points, common intersections, parallels, anything whatsoever? So this hasn't changed. That's amazing.
Well, you
So,
designed it properly in the first place.
yeah, right. So we've got here, why this course? Well, the issue we see is that spirituality, love, and compassion in just everyday daily life seems to be dropping. It's just for whatever reason, people are going much more toward materialism. And at the same time, we look at science, which has been mushrooming over 500 years, and science has now realized that it's studying 5% of the universe in this time, and 95% is unknown or called dark. And you better believe that the best and the brightest are racking their brains for what in the world is in the other 95%. How did we miss this? That's what comes up. And we're going to deal with that and suggest, based on actual observations from Ron Cowan, what the dark is. And then why are we here? Where are we going? Is what we hope everyone will get out of this. And this is where the spirit meets the bone. So we always started off, we love Einstein because he's this union of spirituality, art. He loved to play the violin, and mysticism. And so the key thing that came up with him always was, do you believe in God? And he always answered, I believe in the God of Spinoza. And he's talking about Baruch Spinoza, who was a Dutch philosopher who actually was just now is coming back into his own, as a lot of his papers have been released. And Spinoza was ostracized for centuries because of the issues that he was dealing with, and how he had clear logic and observations that showed that Spinoza was right and the conventional wisdom was wrong, which is not a way to make a lot of friends. So anyway, we'll come back to him. So according to Einstein, Spinoza would say that God would say, stop praying. And what I want you to do, this is God, is go out into the world and enjoy your life sing, have fun, enjoy everything I've made for you, and quit going into those dark, cold temples you built yourself. And you're saying those are my house. My house is the mountains, the woods, the rivers, the lakes, the beaches. That's where I live. That's where I express my love for you, and I'm pure love. Stop blaming me for your miserable life. I never told you there's anything wrong with you, or that you were a sinner, or your sexuality was a bad thing. Sex is a gift I've given you with which you can express your love, your ecstasy, your joy, so don't blame me for everything they made you believe. And finally, stop reading these alleged sacred scriptures that have nothing to do with me. You can't read me in a sunrise, in a landscape, in the look of your friends, in your son's eyes. You won't find me in any book. Stop asking me, will you tell me how to do my job? Stop being so scared of me. I don't judge you or criticize you, nor get angry or bothered. I am pure love. There's nothing to forgive. If I made you, I filled you with passions, limitations, pleasures, feelings, needs, inconsistencies. All of this leads to free will. So how can I blame you if you respond to something I put in you? How can I punish you for being the way you are if I'm the one who made you? Do you think I could create a place to burn all my children who behave badly for the rest of eternity? What kind of a God would do that? Respect your peers. Don't do anything you wouldn't want to do yourself. I can't, oops, I lost something up here. I can't tell you if there's anything after this life, but I can give you a tip. Live as if there is not, as if this is your only chance to enjoy, to love, to exist. So if there's really nothing afterwards, then you'll have enjoyed the opportunity I gave you. And if there is, then rest assured, I won't ask you if you behaved right or wrong. I'll ask, did you like it? Did you have fun? What did you enjoy the most? What did you learn? Stop believing in me. Believing is assuming, guessing, imagining. I don't want you to believe in me. I want you to believe in you. I want you to feel me in you when you kiss your beloved, when you tuck in your little girl, when you caress your dog, when you bathe in the sea. So now we'll just turn to Spinoza for a second so you get some idea of who he is. Here's a picture of Spinoza. He lived from, I think, 1632 to 1677. Um, in Amsterdam by and large. So knowledge, according to Spinoza, has three categories. There's the knowledge we get in daily life, which is the opinions, the conventions, the dogma, all the chatter, yak of daily life. Then we have scientific knowledge, where there's instruments and you can have experiments that can be repeatable and people observe these things. And so that's a different type of knowledge that's based on observations. And then there's the knowledge, which is the real linkage with the collective unconscious. And when you achieve this, then you really know something. But this is totally different than the other two categories. So this suggests for your daily life that you should start the day and link with your collective unconscious. So meditate, spend some time getting centered, and after you've done all this, start the day off and reflect on the attacks that they made on you yesterday. Uh, but step back and just look at what the attacks were, pick out the lessons from the attacks, and then use these lessons to strengthen your arguments. So this is how Spinoza lived. And by and large, I believe this is how Einstein lived also. He would meditate every day, pray, and then start the day off. So, oh, I see what the problem is. This thing is up here at the top. Let me get this out of the way. So what Einstein said was, I think 99 times and I find nothing. So I stop thinking, I just swim in the silence, and all of a sudden the truth comes to me. Well, you should be so lucky as Einstein. Nothing happens. The intellect has little to do on the road to discovery. There comes a leap in consciousness, call it intuition or whatever you will, but the solution comes to you and you don't know how or why. So a human being experiences himself, his thoughts, his feelings as something separated from the rest, a kind of optical delusion of consciousness. This delusion is a kind of prison for us, restricting us to our personal desires. and to affection for a few persons nearest to us. Our task must be to free ourselves from this prison, widening our circle of compassion to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature in its beauty. Is this still, did it change? Yeah, it didn't change. There it goes. So our separation from each other is an illusion. When something vibrates, the electrons of the entire universe resonate with it. Everything is connected, and the greatest tragedy of human existence is the illusion of separateness. Reality is an illusion, albeit a very persistent one. So we're souls dressed up in sacred biochemical garments. Our bodies are the instruments through which our souls play their music. When you examine the lives of the most influential people who have ever walked among us, you discover one thread that winds through them all. They've been aligned first with their spiritual nature, and only then afterwards with their physical selves. The true value of a human being can be found in the degree to which he's attained liberation from the self. The ancients really knew something which we seem to have forgotten. The more I learn of physics, the more I'm drawn to metaphysics. The one thing I've learned in a long life, all our science measured against reality is primitive and childlike. We still do not know 1,000th of 1% of what nature has revealed to us. It's entirely possible that behind the perception of our senses, worlds are hidden of which we are unaware. And I would argue that he's incredibly prescient in saying all these things, which is what we'll cover in the class. I'm not an atheist. The problem involved is too vast for our limited minds. We're in the position of a little child entering a huge library filled with books in many languages. The child knows someone must have written those books. But the common idea that I am an atheist is based on a big mistake. Anyone who interprets my scientific theories this way did not understand them. Everything's determined, every beginning and ending, by forces over which we have no control. It's determined for the insect as well as for the star. Human beings, vegetables, cosmic dust, we all dance to a mysterious tune intoned in the distance by an invisible piper. So the religion of the future will be a cosmic religion, which will transcend a personal God, avoid dogma and theology. So there you go. That's what Einstein got out of Spinoza, and that's how he lived his life. So now we deal with foundations. This is where we have to have a common vocabulary for everyone to have a meaningful dialogue. I can't tell you how many times I've been in discussions where someone is saying something that appears to contradict what someone else is saying, and you discover that each of them has different assumptions. And if they had the same assumptions, you'd realize why they're both right. But that's the way it goes. So the foundations are going to set the ground rules to have a really good, fruitful discussion. But we have to build structure at the outset. Not having structure leads to chaos. Any direction works. You don't get anywhere. And what we'll find again and again is that the words that we use are just too imprecise to capture the true nature of reality. Perhaps mathematics can do so, but we have to invent a lot more math, quite frankly. And this is an open question at present.
Oh, I
So,
forgot to tell you about this slide.
what?
I forgot to tell you about this slide. It was messed up.
Oh, this slide? Well, this is the Microsoft uh, thing. Okay, so what we have in the background here, Ron observed this that our universe apparently has 26 real dimensions. There's 4 here that you can see for space and time, 3 for space, 1 for time. There's a second one over here that's perpendicular to this for space and time. This is where our soul lives.
Why don't you go to the next slide and see if
I will.
it's-
And the the key there, and then there's 18 other dimensions, six here, and six that connect these. So there's 18 dimensions here that are unobserved. And the key thing here, the really fundamental thing here is that Ron observed that the space actually is filled up with an ether, or what are called quantized space compartments. And each of these is covered with information blocks that constantly scan the surroundings and react. And they can control the forces, and they can control the timelines that are here. So it's truly a mind-boggling picture of the universe here.
You should talk about who Ron is.
And Ron is Bruce's brother, who I worked with for 3 years or so. And he was able to, in deep meditation, see into with great clairvoyance, into the microcosm and into the macrocosm. And we'll be dealing with a lot of his observations. So this is typical of something that Ron observed, which is truly mind-boggling.
And he was a Buddhist
He
monk.
was a Buddhist monk.
physicist.
He was a physicist, and we worked together on doing different observations.
And you are.
And I am me. So what we have here
Ron
is,
is a mathematician who Ron asked to help him give a series of checks to the observations that he was making.
yeah, the key thing was that I have a background in mathematical physics, so I was able to put a framework or a structure into the observations that Ron was making to see. And it turns out that many of the things that modern science conjectures, Ron actually observed, as we'll see. Another side to it was, for example, uh, all of these compactified dimensions, there's 18 of them here, are conjectured by science, but Ron was actually able to see these things. Something else that was truly amazing was Ron actually, in an earlier life, was incarnated as a mathematician, Emmy Noether, who was absolutely world class. And so we carried on a three-way dialogue where Ron would hear Emmy is asking a question, but it's for me. And then I would try and answer it, and Ron would come back and say, Emmy says, no, that's wrong. You got to, you think about it some more, or whatever. So um, it was amazing. Emmy Noether, among other things, when Einstein was developing his theory of general relativity, he wondered, does conservation of energy still hold? And he approached David Hilbert. Einstein approached David Hilbert, and David Hilbert said, "Oh, Emmy Noether can deal with this." And so she showed Einstein that conservation of energy might be violated locally, but if you looked over a large enough region, it was always energy was always conserved, and so that made Einstein happy, and that's who she is. She can solve problems that Einstein couldn't solve. So this is a different picture here. And the difference in this thing is we have the picture you saw on the previous slide over here, but we just highlighted this information that coats everything, that controls all of these forces in the universe and is everywhere. And so everything we know about physics here starts with these fundamental particles, which are called subquarks. You take three subquarks to make a quark, three quarks to make a proton or a neutron, and and electrons are quarks also in this terminology, and that leads into chemistry here, and it leads into biology. The difference is that the uh, dark matter has a very different schema than matter. In particular, uh, dark matter is made up of five strings that vibrate, and inside the strings, energy resonates. So it's kind of like a jelly. It's not really a particle. It's an It's a resonating set of 5 strings with energy. Here for matter, there are 10 strings. So they're vibrating more violently, more rapidly. And there's also electric charge here associated with these. So the end result is that we end up with chemistry based on electrons circling a cloud in a cloud around a nucleus made up of protons and neutrons, whereas in dark matter, there isn't anything other than these subquarks. So you just form these fern-like structures or branching trees that make up dark energy. And uh, the dark matter. And the dark matter can either be sentient or quiescent. Ron observed tubes in space, hundreds of thousands of kilometers long, that are just quiescent because they're not close to anything that would allow it to vibrate, like a star or a planet. So that they're just floating there. But if they landed on a planet, then they started to vibrate and do their thing, and that awakened them from being quiescent now, and they're sentient at this point. Whereas in our world, we have things like DNA and RNA and actual bioelectricity that controls the biology there. Here we have something totally different for dark matter. And so it goes. Our chakras, Ron observed, are made up of these little dark matter nodules. And so with that, the other key thing was that electromagnetism includes all the forces that modern physics knows, including gravity, because the gravity is related to how the ether that fills the empty space uh, is more dense or less dense. The denser the ether, the greater the gravity, and so it goes. So this is just a little summary. Here we put everything in complex dimensions, try and simplify it. So the 3 dimensions we live in are in space, and next to them are 3 dimensions for the dark matter. But they're actually complex. They're real and imaginary parts. So there's really only 3 complex dimensions here. I said there were 18 real compactified dimensions, but there's really only 9 compactified spatial dimensions. And then we have 1 complex dimension for time. The time for matter is different from the time for dark matter. So they're paired up in this way. And just to remind everybody, since I always get this question asked, what in the world is a complex number? So complex number, you take a real number, which is called the real part of it, and you add to it another real number, but it's multiplied by I, which is the square root of -1. And why in the world would you ever want this? Well, if you ever took uh, algebra anytime, you ended up needing these complex numbers because if you try and solve the equation x squared equals 4, you realize there's 2 roots, +2 and -2. But what if x squared is equal to -4? Then you have 2 roots, +2 and -2, but they're each multiplied by the square root of -1. So that when I square this, I'll get -4 for each of these. And just to make it more complicated, if I took x squared plus 2x plus 5, then I get x equals -1 plus or minus 3i. I have 2 solutions there, just like up here, but you can see that there's a real and imaginary part down here. So that's just a little primer on this. And then the other question I get asked is, what in the world are these compactified dimensions? So because we just got through saying, well, they're actually real and imaginary parts. Think of this as being the real and imaginary part of the complex compactified spatial dimension for the x-axis that we observe. So this is wrapped around the x-axis, this sheet that we have here. And we also do one of these for the y-axis and for the z-axis. So we have everything covered. The problem with this is that when we get to, I mentioned there's 6 dimensions that are common. It gets to be tricky to sort it out. So there's a different way, which is you just have if it's 26 dimensions, you have a 26 tuple. That means I have 26 entries shown by a parens here and a parens here. And there's actually, if you count everything up here, 26. So we have matter here that resides in three spatial dimensions, X, Y, and Z. We have time. Time is here, but we multiply it by speed of light times the square root of -1. So there's the four space-time dimensions that we find in all the modern physics books. Then we go to the compactified dimensions. We have x1, y1, z1, and I, the square root of -1 times x1, y1, z1. This is the six compactified dimensions that go with the four dimensions for matter. So we're done. Now here's all the 10 dimensions for dark matter, but those are all zero because we're dealing with matter here. And then we have these remaining six dimensions. So I put it as x common, y common, z common, and I times the square root of -1 times this for each of these. So I have six compactified dimensions. Similarly, for dark matter, I have 10 zeros here. Then I have x2, y2. Up here I had x1, y1, etc. And then I get down here. So I have everything in tuples now, 26 tuples. But it appears that the most action, the real energetic spirits, are in these highest six compactified dimensions. And the thing that's left out of the picture is there's 8 holes that connect the 18 compactified dimensions. So if there's 8 holes, there's really only 18 minus 8 or 10 independent tuples. I can write these tuples down, but they're not all independent of one another. And it's interesting that there was a development at Yale by David Galertner for associated memory, which he called tuple space. And the question is, are those ideas at all relevant to our dealing with this here? David Galertner is known because he was a very prominent computer scientist, but he was also a prominent columnist advocating conservative causes. And the Unabomber sent him a bomb which blew off his fingers on his hand. He's still there at Yale. Then the compactified dimensions all came about through two mathematicians, Eugenio Calabi, who proposed these things in 1954. He said, I think we need some very nice extra dimensions that have some nice properties. And Sheng-Tung Yao proved that these manifolds existed in math. Just because you assert something, that doesn't mean they exist. You have to show that they exist, which is what Yao did. But the proof was so phenomenal that he received the Fields Medal in 1983, which is the Nobel Prize equivalent in mathematics. There is no Nobel Prize for math. So these Calabi-Yau manifolds are typically 6 dimensions, as we saw, and those are the ones that are used in string theory and so forth. So we're dealing right at the forefront of science here. And the thing to keep in mind here, here's a nice little picture here showing in 2 dimensions what a 6-dimensional Calabi-Yau manifold would look like. And as you look at this, you see there's some holes there in it. And this thing actually morphs and changes and runs around. There's many nice videos on the web. And what's interesting is that here's the tree of life from the mystic side of Judaism, the Kabbalah. And there are 10 Sephiroth in this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 Sephiroth here. And so apparently the mystics in Judaism were able to see these 18 compactified dimensions, and they realized that there were really only 10 dimensions because of the 8 holes. So I have no idea how they did this, but so be it. Here's what Ron observed. This is truly amazing. If you go into any physics book, there's a great discussion of electricity and magnetism. Well, Ron actually has a picture of what an electron looks like. You won't find this in any physics book anywhere. Here's the 10 closed strings we talked about for an electron. Ron was able to stop this. This is normally vibrating at hundreds of millions of times per second, Normally, if you can't stop it, it just looks like a big blur. That's all you would see. But the energy is inside it. The energy is all here like a jelly inside it, okay, that's resonating due to the strings here, but it actually forms a hole or a donut that's here. So you can see right through the middle of the electron. Looking down on it, here's what Ron saw. And this electron is completely coated with these blocks of information that are going to be scanning everything around them. They have all the algorithms of the universe in it, and they have storage. So this is coding not only the electrons, but the compartments of space that the electron sits in. This is a computer, the likes of which we can't even begin to imagine how this thing would ever be built. And just to show that Ron isn't the only one doing this, here's two other examples. Annie Besant and Charles Leadbeater, in a book in 1908, published this showing here's what is going on with electron. There's 10 closed strings, just like Ron saw. And there was another chap named Babbitt who saw the same thing in the 1880s or so. So here is his picture here. So Ron didn't make this stuff up. He confirmed all the observations that these other people had done. Truly an incredible accomplishment. Now, just as an aside, we have this crazy thing of 26 real dimensions. That's great. But it just turns out that in the year 2000, 2005, mathematicians finished a study of symmetries that are called groups. And these are called finite simple groups because these are for example, the Platonic solids come out of this and so forth. And the study of the symmetries resulted in a periodic table showing that there's these major categories of symmetries, of which I believe there's 18 of them running across here. You can see them, they're shaded in different ways. Now, what's crazy is that in the study of symmetries, it turns out there were 26 symmetries called sporadic or uh, exceptional that are shown down here. There's 13 here and there's 13 here. And when you see something like this, it makes you wonder, is there some relationship between these 26 sporadic uh, groups, these symmetries here, and the 26 dimensions that make up our universe? Because the earlier example of this is the periodic table of elements. This was done in the 1860s, 1870s. It's been filled out and refined ever since, but this suggested the structure. Here's a hydrogen atom element. Here's helium. Here's lithium. Here's boron, and so forth. But you notice the structure that they're grouped together. So there's two here, then there's eight here, and so forth. And this led to the development in physics of quantum mechanics, where the two that were here was just showing that the electron could be in one of two energy levels for a hydrogen atom or for a helium atom. Once you had more than two electrons, you ended up with these elements here, like lithium, boron, carbon, oxygen, etc., that are running across here. But there were only eight of these. And why in the world are there only eight? So this is what comes out of quantum mechanics. It was driven by this discovery of the periodic table of elements that got people thinking about this. So similarly, since we now have this roadmap for symmetries here, and there's 26 sporadic symmetries, do they really bear any relationship one-to-one with the 26 real dimensions? So I leave that as a homework exercise. You have to work that out for next class. Then we deal with poetry and music and the mysticism associated with this, which is a different way of using things. Rather than using the language of mathematics and science, poetry and music have their own way of doing this. So poetry always evokes concepts that words cannot express. It's typically not what a poem means, but how a poem means that is really the critical thing. So here we're going to survey Emerson, who read the Bhagavad Gita. This is the longest poem that of any poem in the world. Walt Whitman, who was a poet, Emily Dickinson, the Sufi uh, uh, and mystic Rumi. These are all poets, but they all give different ways of describing the mysticism, and each of them doing it their own way. There's many, many, many others, undoubtedly. We just stopped in our survey of just picking these. And one thing that comes out of this is to complement this is music. And music, it turns out, excites the pleasure center of the brain, and this is where you end up with drugs like LSD exciting you, or you have sexual ecstasy. Music is exciting that same area here, and the patterns that are generated here, one thinks actually link with this collective unconsciousness that is all around us, and they resonate in all different forms of music. So music is a different way of expressing this than poetry. So those are just two examples of art. We like Hildegard von Bingen, who lived from 1098 to 1179. She was ran three different abbeys on the Rhine, uh, and she was located in Bingen. That's how she gets her name. But she is actually the best known composer of sacred monophonic music, and she has the greatest number of recordings. If you go on YouTube or anybody else, you'll find many, many, many recordings of the chants that she recorded. She did this typically when she was going through some sort of, I'll just say, seizure or vision there. And that was what drove her to do this. But she did many, many other things, incredible writer and philosopher and mystic, and also a medical practitioner here. Many people view her as the founder of scientific natural history in Germany. A different one, just look at as spiritual music, which includes all kinds of things like spirituals from the American South, or devotional hymns, chants like Buddhist mantras, and Jewish pizmonim. And then there's broader musical genres like gospel music genres, classical music, and certain forms of popular music that express themes of love, faith, and awakening. So all of these could be viewed as spiritual. There's many, many things here, but the key characteristic is its ability to connect with something transcendent, something that fosters a sense of a deeper feeling or spiritual awakening in the listener. Uh, got this thing in the way, so let me get out of the way. They have these different religions. So Christianity, the music shows up as psalms, hymns, compositions like Gregorian chants. In Islam, there's the call to prayer, the Muwashra, the Persian and the Indian Qawwali music. In Hinduism, we have devotional songs, which also often express the love for the divine. In Judaism, besides this pizmonim, we have songs intended to praise God and teach religious lessons. Typically, they're sung on holidays and ceremonies. And then Buddhism, which uses chants and different traditional texts, such as sutras and mantras, accompanied by instruments. So there's no shortage of spiritual music out there. And in art, we put up 4 examples here. So you'd see, if you go to our website for Aleph Talks, AlephTalks.com, you'll find here this picture. This thing has, if you look at it, there's a top and a bottom with some sort of energy going through here, and there's 10 planes here. So the artist that put this together, conceptually, this is a modern tree of life That's a highly abstract version of it. But that's this is why art is a metaphor. Here is a Sri Rantra out of Hinduism, which has its own particular ideas. And these two things here on the diagonals were taken out of the Red Book that was done by Carl Jung in 1914 to 1913 to 1930, but it was only published in 2009, 2010. So you can look at this, and there's many pictures, paintings that Jung put in this as he went through this crisis that he captured in the Red Book. And these are amazing pictures, drawings that he put together here. So again, this is all art and spirituality. We touched on poetry. This is the art form that is both aesthetic and rhythmic, using the qualities of the language to evoke meanings beyond just the literal meaning of the language. And so there's rhythm, there's rhyme, there's imagery that convey these emotion and ideas in some sort of imaginative way, but not all poems employ these. And poets use all kinds of devices or techniques, very creative, to get people to pay attention. Now we turn to the unit where we're going to survey mysticism around the globe, East and West. And so what we find here is the uh, parable of the blind men and the elephant. Here you see a bunch of blind men, and they're each going up. This one has the trunk of the elephant. There's another one who has the tusk of the elephant. This one has the ear. This one has the side. This one has the leg. This one has the tail. So they're all feeling some piece of the elephant. And the problem with this is that they're missing, since they're all blind, that there's an elephant there. And the things that come out of this is each of these different uh, traditions, each of these different faiths that we deal with here probably are all correct, but they're not the whole story. There's probably something deeper beyond that. And this is the problem we face, is that you've got to get people to agree to this, that there really is just one elephant there. So we look in the East at the Tao, the way of Lao Tzu, the Mahabharata, Bhagavad Gita, and the Upanishads in India, and Buddhism, of course, the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. We have Judaism and Christianity and Islam. And then in the West, we have a variety of things due to shaman and Native Americans. So let's take a look at this. So shamanism is the thing we start with, because there's lots of tribes all over the place, and everything kind of started from this. In the tribes, there was typically a person, a shaman, who was sensitive to the spiritual realm, and they ended up entering an altered state of consciousness to try and see how would I cure you of this illness or whatever your problem is. So they're healers, they're community leaders, they're mediators, and by connecting to the spirit realm, they can heal or divine various things to try and bring things into harmony. And they're found all across the globe. Very, very common. Then we have, this one got left out of the way. We have Druidism. So the Druids probably came out of Atlantis, no one knows. But the Druids were philosophers and men learned in the religious affairs. And the Romans wrote about them, in particular, Julius Caesar remarked it could take up to 20 years to complete a course of study in the lore of the Druids, all kinds of things to be memorized and so forth. But we don't know where this came from, and we think it might have come out of Atlantis, but that's just a guess. But there's a lot of stuff here. Then we go into Egypt, and here what we find is the flower of life in Egypt and the sacred geometry that goes with it. Do you want to talk about this?
Um, well, this comes up in many traditions. I would say recently the Jewish tradition has kind of taken credit for it, but it doesn't seem that that's accurate because it was apparent in art and architecture all over the Middle East as well as Egypt, and the symbolism seems very consistent. So there's the tree of life, which actually comes out of the flower of life, which is represented here. It's a sacred geometry pattern of evenly spaced overlapping circles that represents the fundamental building blocks of creation and the interconnectedness of all things. It's a little hard to see the way these overlap. Here's the center of one circle, and this is the circumference of that one, but it's the center of this circle. And that's the seed pattern. Let's go a little bit further. This is the tree of life, showing that. And this is what the Kabbalah is based on. There's this one here is omitted. So it's, perhaps most familiar to us out of Jewish Kabbalah, but as a geometric pattern, it was, really developed and extant in all kinds of other traditions. It's a geometric pattern. It's formed by drawing these overlapping circles, and it forms all these other patterns within it, like the what is it, the fish that's said
Right,
to
yeah.
be the seed of Christianity. The central pattern of 7 circles is known as the seed of life, believed to be the origin of all creation, the symbol of spiritual awakening. And that's also, showing that in our calendar, the 7 days of the week. And it's a thing in sacred geometry that a circle can be surrounded by 6 circles of the same size. They just fit perfectly, forming 7 circles in the 7 days a week. So yeah, the Vesica Piscis, that was it. Can be seen in the overlapping of these two, and that wedge in the middle. And so that's in, I want to say pre-Christian formulations of sacred geometry in Christianity.
So here's these patterns are found in Phoenicia, Assyria, India, all throughout Asia. They're in medieval art. It's something global. It's not unique to Egypt.
They really look like cells. Let's move this out of the way for a second. The essence is the seed of the tree of life, which is repeated, ad infinitum in this. It's like a grid. And it's a fractal. It's a recurring holographic concept.
If you looked in each of the Sephiroth, you'd see another tree of life.
Right.
And if you looked in each of those, you'd see another tree of life. So it's truly fractal.
And just infinite. The seed is something so small that it is, the mustard seed lacks quantity, yet it is pure quality. In other words, the spiritual spark within us contains all the possibilities for true happiness, peace, contentment, and psychological and spiritual development. In this way, it is our true nature, our character, the light within, something eternal and infinite. And I just want to say it goes beyond the Hebrew tradition. You see very similar concepts in Sufism, and they were definitely cross-pollinating, in those early days. And the Sufis, were there in a way as the mystics of the group. That was there before Muhammad. All these things are beyond their, where it was identified with.
Right. So the thing that's here is the seed of the tree of life. This is different from our physical body, which can be weighed and measured, which is finite and so forth. But the seed is not actuated until when these negative thoughts come and eat it. That's how seeds travel, as the animals eat the seeds and excrete them elsewhere. But the essence is not to be able to take root, because these shallow doctrines will wither as soon as the light of the sun shows up. And so it goes. But when our divine spiritual essence encounters it, it will flourish. So that's what it's looking for, is true light. And the being is really the tree, this internal God, Father, Mother. We're not usually taught that we have an internal being, but this being is not an entity. You could think of it again as your soul, if you want to think of it as that. But one way to conceptualize this is with the symbol of the tree of life. So it's really understood just in this manner. And in our state of consciousness, when we ignore these other dimensions that we've been talking about, and we meditate and dream, then we can reach consciously into these higher realms, which is what Ron did. And we can comprehend the intimate and the ultimate reality of this true entity that's there.
You can think of it as the Atma, or the atom in all of us. But it's symbolic. It's not, they're not really talking about a personal God.
Right. So this could be viewed as important in the work of Buddhism, to let go of attachments of the mind to achieve enlightenment, or the path of Christ is about learning to sacrifice our selfish desires and make room for the divine within our lives to love ourselves. And the balance of all this leads to where we have a self-realization. Some say that Buddhism is the silence, but Christianity is the word. That's probably a play on words. So let's look some more. And we go to India, we have the Upanishads. You're going to see there's three of these areas. The Upanishads are one. They're the most ancient foundational philosophical texts that explore the nature of reality, consciousness, and connection to the universal spirit, which is called Brahman. So the Bhagavad Gita is a distinct text from the epic Mahabharata, which is this incredibly long epic poem. Rather than being a standalone text, it synthesizes and presents the wisdom of the Upanishads in the Bhagavad Gita in a more accessible form to emphasize paths like karma, yoga, which is selfless action, knowledge, and devotion to this personal God toward reaching this. And this, in this way, it was meant to be more accessible. Now, the Upanishads are the knowledge portion of the Vedas, which are these ancient sacred texts that are there in India, but they contain all of these insights and wisdom and delve into existential questions about reality, consciousness, the purpose of life, and so forth. And their structure is primarily
interesting terms that are introduced there. The individual self is the Atman, and the absolute universal consciousness
is the Brahman.
is the Brahman. I mean, I think those are
Those are useful.
yeah, useful metaphors.
Thank you. These are philosophical poems, and they really form the foundation of this philosophy that is developed here. And if we go here to this Mahabharata, this has 100,000 verses in it, so this is this is heavy-duty reading. It's significantly longer than the combined works of the Iliad and the Odyssey, and no one really knows where it came from, but apparently it's attributed to Vyasa, but there are probably multiple poets that composed it. This is, again, 100,000 verses. And what comes out of this is that there's this war, this conflict that takes place between these brothers and their cousins for the throne of this kingdom. And the war of succession is the climax of the story, with this battle being fought on the fields there. Unfortunately, one of the problems with this is that it deals directly with nuclear weapons. It's very clear if you read this that, and so this was written thousands of years ago, which makes you wonder what's going on here. But that's what it shows. I encourage you to go check this out for yourself. So
It's a wonderful, it's almost like a Socratic dialogue, wisdom teachings about, he doesn't want to go to war.
there's his charioteer, which is Krishna, actually, and
Arjuna.
And Arjuna has this discussion, and he's really worried that he's going to be killing his cousins. And Krishna tries to explain to him it's already fated; they're already dead or injured, whatever you want to call. And he has to come to grips with this concept. The Arjuna and Krishna carry on this dialogue, which leads to all these poems, but it leads to the themes of duty and righteousness, or dharma, justice, what happens inside a family, because again, Arjuna is going after his cousins, morality, and the complex interplay of good and evil. And so this is really a foundational text here. Now, the Bhagavad Gita here is one episode within the Mahabharata. Okay, and this by itself is huge, but it's the song of the Lord, again, with dealing with Krishna and Arjuna, but it's meant to be accessible to the philosophy of what's in the Upanishads, and how you can carry out daily life. So many Indians will read some piece of the Gita every day, and
over and over again.
Yeah, over and over. And so you end up with different types of paths to spiritual liberation: selfless action, which is karma yoga; devotion, which is bhakti yoga; and knowledge, which is jnana yoga. And so it goes. And this is really the cream of the essence of the Upanishads,
Oh,
which has distilled their complex teachings into something that is accessible to everybody for daily life. So the Upanishads are many more words, more cryptic, but the Bhagavad Gita makes all these ideas accessible. And there are also the Brahma Sutras that come along with this. So you have the Upanishads, the Bhagavad Gita, and the Brahma Sutras give you the triple canon. These three things together make up the Vedanta, which is the primary source is the Upanishads, the summary is the Gita, and the logical analysis, how these things fit together. So the Brahma Sutras we just touched on, their foundational Sanskrit text, put together by a scribe trying to synthesize all of this into a framework. And the sutras are themselves very short aphorisms. There are 4 chapters in this, and it gives you a path to self-realization. Now, the 4 chapters are just summarized here so you can see what's going on, and so forth. But notice that chapter 2 addresses all the objections from other philosophical traditions, such as yoga and Buddhism and Jainism and so forth. And here in chapter 3, you explore how you can achieve self-realization and liberation. Okay. Totally separate from this are the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, which I read. There's 196 of these. They're each 3 to 5 words of Sanskrit. And on the other hand, the book that you see here, which you can get, is about 2 inches thick. So the 196 sutras are broken out into, I'll say, 4 books, 4 chapters. The first one, the Samadhi, is what the West calls yoga. This is where you learn how to stretch, control your breathing, and get centered so that you can turn out on all the yak, yak, yak going around you in daily life, which raises the question of what in the world are in the other sutras if this is only 1/4 of it. So if you dig into it, you'll see, especially in the book 2, book 3, book 4, there's a lot of things leading up to trying to achieve enlightenment through deep meditation. But the key thing here in book 3, if you go to sutras number, say, 25 to 30, you'll see that, oh, by the way, if you do work at this, you'll be able to do what Ron Cowan did. You can achieve clairvoyance. You can achieve the ability to look into the microcosm or into the far reaches of space. You can actually appear in 2 places at once, and on and on. But those are pointed out to be simply these are interesting, but it's much more important to achieve this linkage, this with the unconscious that's all around us, and that leads you to understand true love, love for yourself, love for your neighbor, and that's really the point of it. But it is interesting that in book 3 they do describe this stuff. So, as an example, Marco Polo uh, wrote up his travels going to China and back for the Italians, and he said, by the way, I was on a watering hole on the Silk Road, and this uh, uh, person there had 2 sons, and they were both yogis, and they were both sitting there floating in the air at 3 feet off the ground. So that's an example of what you could achieve through deep meditation. But it's not really the point of yoga. The point is to achieve this enlightenment or linkage with the true collective unconscious that's
they're
everywhere.
distractions
These are
along the
these are
way.
parlor tricks. Don't get hung up on these things. Some people get hung up on them. Now we go to China and the Tao, the way, or the Tao of Lao Tzu. And in this, the way or the Tao is unnameable. It's the indefinable source. It's the underlying order of the universe. So it's the natural path and way of all things that exists before and beyond reality. And it can't be understood or expressed in words, but it can be experienced through living in harmony with nature, finding balance, and practicing Wu Wei, this effortless action. So if you think about this, this is very much what the Yoga Sutras are trying to achieve, or what was going on in uh, the Hindu practices here as well, with the Brahma Sutras.
Sounds like what Jesus might have been trying to get
Right,
across.
which is, yeah, very much, and what the Jewish mystics were achieving, and what Mohammed achieved as when he was in his cave. So the goal of life is to align oneself with this Tao, with this natural order, which recognizes the profound unity of everything. And again, what's interesting here is Jung had this book called The Golden Flower, translated from Chinese into German uh, for Jung, and now it's been translated into English. But notice the symbol for this, the golden flower, the central metaphor, looks, is exactly what we were talking about before, with the seed of the tree of life and tree of life uh, here, and the spiritual transformation of this golden flower. uh, you go from a divided state of consciousness to a state where you're enlightened, or you have an undivided state. You're free from your ego. And this is, again, considered a template for all creation and for the emergence of all life from a single source. So this is why Jung jumped all over this. This is an incredible book. The golden flower symbolizes spiritual enlightenment in the Tao. Uh, and the other thing to keep in mind, the ancient text, which is called The Secret of the Golden Flower, represents the blooming of the inner spiritual light to achieve the undivided state of the Tao. And this is all found, this sacred geometry, and as we saw, all over the planet Earth. Then we go to Buddhism, and here Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, lived roughly 2,500 years ago. This is a non-theistic tradition that teaches the path to end suffering and achieve enlightenment or nirvana by understanding the causes of suffering and cultivating wisdom, virtue, and concentration. So we have to deal here with the Four Noble Truths, and then the Eightfold Path to achieve uh, this enlightenment here. The Buddha's was an awakened human who taught others how to escape suffering. And Dharma is the term that refers to the teachings of the Buddha and the path that leads to liberation, while Nirvana is the ultimate goal in Buddhism. But Nirvana is a state of profound inner peace and wisdom, representing liberation from the cycle of suffering and rebirth. The Buddhists believe in a cycle of rebirth. You live, you die, and you're reborn. But each life, you're understanding the consequences of your actions, the karma, which determines the circumstances of the future lives.
As I understand it, it really comes down to Dharma is the most important, is your sense of duty and service, because that can transmute any karma, which is your debt, from the past. If you're making enough, contribution and becoming conscious enough, that can be transmuted, and you don't really have control over the past, assuming that time is linear and that it works the way we are thinking of it. But we were taught in the group I was a part of for a while to give, forgive, and serve. the more you can give, the more you can forgive, and the more you live a life of service, the more you're transmuting that accumulation of karma anyway.
Mhm.
So that's like the antidote to the dead end that it seems like we're just stuck with. Sometimes it just seems like click-clack balls going back and forth, reacting to one another and the circumstances that we find ourselves in. You think, well, so why bother? Well, to my mind, the whole notion of dharma is the why bother, because that's what can change. That's where your potential freedom lies, is in your dharma and how you end up giving and forgiving.
So the Buddha codified this into these Four Noble Truths. First, you have to realize that you're suffering. You're living, but you might not realize this, but you're actually suffering. And in fact, you're causing the suffering through your desires or craving that is the root cause of the suffering, which is the second noble truth. So you can end the suffering by letting go of these desires. But how in the world do you do that? Well, you need a path to do that, which is this Eightfold Path. And this involves a variety of things that would allow you to do this. There's another side here, the Sangha, or the community of the Buddhists who follow this path together. Uh, and so you'll run into these things when you're looking into Buddhism. Bruce, what do you want to say?
As the resident Buddhist,
Bruce is a Buddhist, and he's the brother of Ron Cowan.
Well, enlightenment is basically the accomplishment where, well, basically there's where you transcend the self. There's no longer a self. And what happens is that you have what they call immeasurable compassion and primordial wisdom. This is a natural part of the mind that's been there forever already. So you're not accomplishing something new. You're just returning to your own natural mind. And the other big thing is that you discover that the world is in union with itself. Nothing is actually separate. And the insight of love and compassion gives you that realization. That's sort of my experience of Buddhism.
That's great.
very succinct.
Very nice. Thank you very much. So we're going to cover all this in the class. We're just touching on this to set the stage. And we go here to Judaism, where we have this group called Jews that are bound together by the belief in one God. Other groups believed in many gods. And this God really revealed these divine laws to a patriarch, Abraham, and to a prophet, Moses. So the adherents of Judaism follow these laws. They're found in the Torah, which are the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible, the Pentateuch. And then there are also other sacred texts like the Talmud, which I believe is a variety of learned people, rabbis, for example, that read the Torah and interpreted it. So these interpretations guide the spiritual, cultural, and communal life. And the Talmud is a real step up in terms of complexity, in terms of really getting into what's going on. But then there's a third area, the Zohar, and the most mystical teachings there are collected in the Kabbalah, which is what we believe Jesus was. He was a Kabbalist. So Judaism emphasizes these relationships between God and humanity, the land of Israel, the Jewish people, and it focuses on personal responsibility and action to sanctify the world. So we just went through the high holy days where people were you end up atoning for everything you did over the past year that requires atonement. That's
I think it's right now. I think
it's going on right now is what I think it is.
this week.
Yeah. So as an example, here we have more on the Kabbalah. Here you see the tree of life over here, and this thing that's different here is in the Talmud. There's something like 600 practices that you have to follow to be a good kosher Jew. The Kabbalah, to many Jews, is really not studied. You have to be almost chosen and have a desire to go in this direction, but it's the mystical philosophy that focuses on the hidden nature of God and the universe, which is seen as unified and an underlying reality beyond that which we see. So what we see isn't really the true reality, is what these Kabbalists are saying. And there's a transcendent, infinite Godhead called the Ein Sof, which cannot be directly known, but it interacts through the world through these 10 Sephiroth, which are shown here, these 10 nodes in this tree. And the teachings provide these insights along the way. So the tree of life that we're showing here has 22 paths connecting them, and it's really a symbolic map of creation and the structure of existence. What would you like to say?
That's good.
Okay. This is the most mystic of the mystics, and this is what
These images that you're seeing here to the right are actually from the Western esoteric tradition, and these are all tarot cards on these paths because they correspond. That's how the divination system of the tarot is said to work, that it's tapping into these fields. It's everything is one, but it's also incredibly complex. It's not just a jar of mayonnaise. It's more like spaghetti, it's got all these intricate connections and layers, and each one is like a portal into multiple dimensions itself.
All right. Great. Let's see what we've got here. There's this tree of life that shows how this infinite divine essence emanates into what we see as the world. There's this the practitioners, the Kabbalists, understand the nature of God. This helps them to understand the nature of God and the relationship between the divine and the physical world. And this diagram shows the journey. Basically, the bottom is kind of the root, and the top is the most abstract. And so this journey of the soul gives you this spiritual map for becoming one with God.
It's different things on different levels. On one level, it can be seen as a blueprint of the individual psyche. It's a model of that, the hidden motivations and the different states, but then it's also a map of reality as we know it, as we conceive of it, and the divine and God. And those clearly are not all the same thing. They may be different versions or levels. So it depends on how you're working with it. You can see it as it's like a diagram of chakras. It's similar to that. And there's all different techniques of practice. There's you could be looking at it frontwards so that it's your right shoulder and your left shoulder, then your elbow and your hands, or it could be a head, and you can also back into it so that your left is on the right and the right is on the left. You can back into it or go in frontwards. There's, a million different ways that it can be worked with. And it's not really any one thing. It's a tool. It's meant to be used as
Mhm.
a, a, a means to multiple ends.
Right.
But just even learning the terminology, learning the Hebrew and the correspondences that work with it changes your consciousness.
Yeah. In fact, I forgot to mention this, but if you read the Yoga Sutras in Sanskrit, just reading them in Sanskrit, you start to feel what each of the sutras means. It sounds crazy, but it works. You can actually do this.
It's said that the two really sacred languages that we know of, and this is, I'm sure, biased, are Hebrew and Sanskrit. That because they are inherently spiritual languages, just learning them enhances your consciousness.
Right. So this is just to close out some more stuff on the tree of life. We're not going to deal with it here. So then we go to Christianity. Here we have a picture of Yeshua, the Nazarene, and here is his companion, Mary Magdalene. There's a lot of evidence now that Mary Magdalene uh, and Jesus were in fact husband and wife, and that she had several kids by him. Uh, the reason that we're focusing on this Christianity is that the teachings of Yeshua the Nazarene, who's now called Jesus Christ, is that if you followed his teachings, you could achieve salvation and enlightenment through faith, following the way that he described and that he and Mary Magdalene preached and taught to many others. They throughout their years of being active, and it appears that Yeshua was educated as an Essene, but he traveled extensively because of his uncle Joseph of Arimathea. He went to England, to Cornwall, where there were tin mines that Joseph, in fact, was using to provide throughout the Roman Empire. And this led him to the study of Druidism. He was already studying Judaism in Palestine there. He was exposed in Egypt to Isis, and Mary Magdalene was, in fact, part of the school of Isis. He traveled the Silk Road through Joseph of Arimathea to learn Buddhism, the Tao, and all of the Vedic scriptures. And the other side of things here is it appears that Mary Magdalene was independently wealthy, and she actually funded Yeshua and his disciples. This is relatively recent, but you have to ask yourself, how could Jesus and these disciples, these apostles, run around for years? Where did the money come from? Apparently, it came from Mary Magdalene. She should be viewed as the first pope. She was the one that explained this stuff to all of the men because she was a formidable intellect. Then we go to Islam. Uh, Here's the Prophet Muhammad. Again, a monotheistic religion, but it centers on submitting to the will of Allah, and Muslims follow this. It's the second largest religion in the world. the Quran and the Sunnah end up dealing with what the prophet had to say. The Quran is what he dictated when he was in a cave. He was directly communing with some sort of spiritual entity. And the other thing, besides having a belief in one God and having prophets, including Muhammad, but including Yeshua, the Nazarene, and the other prophets, Moses and Abraham and so forth, is that there are these holy books. There is going to be a day of judgment. And then there are these five pillars of Islam: the declaration of faith, the prayer, you pray 5 times a day; charity, you contribute from your wealth for charitable causes; you fast regularly, and you pilgrimage once in your life to Mecca. So this is viewed as the ultimate in anyone who's in Islam, is to go to pilgrimage to Mecca. The Sufis are the most mystic. Here's a Sufi here, but they're dancing, they're spinning around. And so these are viewed as mystics in Islam, and they follow the mysticism and esoteric side of Islam called tasawwuf. They're very devout, and they focus on the integral or spiritual aspects of the faith. They seek a direct personal experience of God through meditation, chanting, poetry, and they recite the names of God, the Allah. And while doing all this, they emphasize the path of love and seeking to purify their heart from its ego and materialism to achieve the spiritual proximity to the divine. So as you can see, these things, there's a remarkable degree of similarity in the beliefs of all of these different faiths that are out there. So with that, we finish. We'll also do some stuff on Native Americans, for example, and so forth. But that finishes our mysticism in East and West. And now we return to the syllabus, and we're dealing with Carl Jung. Do you want to deal with this?
Well, as it says here, he lived at the tail end or the last 25 years of the 19th of the sorry of the 19th century, and lived for the first half of the 20th century, but his ideas are really 21st century ideas. I think of him as a prophet for the age of Aquarius, really, nothing less. The two cornerstones of his work were his concepts of archetypes, which emerge out of the collective unconscious, and synchronicity. And more and more of his work is just being published for the first time. A lot of it was held back. His family insisted after he was gone, and things like the Red Book, have just been allowed to emerge. And he was far more of a mystic himself than was commonly exposed before now. It's just really becoming clear, really what he was getting at. So he was always fascinated by these concepts of the collective unconscious, and he saw archetypes as examples of their existence is almost independent of us. It's almost like they are dreaming us. They're not just dreaming the myth and the archetypes. Or people are just dreaming them. They are dreaming people. So he wrote about things like the golden flower, and the Dead Sea Scrolls. I mean, he was interested in all of it and wanted it all to be available and translated. You know, he's the kind of scholar that would have just thrived in the library at Alexandria. You know, with all the wisdom of all the traditions that was destroyed. So I mean, I really consider him really almost like a prophet himself.
The thing was, he wrote only one thing on religion. It was called the Answer to Job. The book of Job is in the uh, Old Testament, and of all the things that he could choose to write about, that's the one thing he wrote about. So we cover that, and we'll come back to that later on.
I think it's an incredibly profound book, and it's fascinating from a psychological, spiritual perspective. He's showing the evolution of the God concept. I mean, I don't think he was religious in the standard sense of it, but he's showing how that is evolving through us. The God concept was evolving through the dynamic between Job and Yud-Hey-Vav-Hey. You know, whatever that was. You know, it's pretty mysterious when you look at it the way he's looking at it, and that it was understood that Job was, you know, kinder and more generous than this God that was supposedly infinite, and that God needed to experience the phenomenon of limitation because God was infinite and eternal. God, it could not understand limitation. And so how could he judge? How could he, because he couldn't understand what it was to be a limited human being. How could he ever judge it? And he really kind of failed in any moral universe in being tempted by the devil. And Job, I mean, and Job, maybe he identified with him. And Job rose to the occasion and showed what it is to be a good human being. So anyway, it's a kind of
So
interesting.
the instantation of this is Yeshua the Nazarene, who was God incarnate, so that he could understand limitations.
Right. That was
That was the true answer to Job, to the book of Job. So the archetypes have different categories, and we resonate with these things, and they're found in astrology. And Jung was himself uh, quite knowledgeable in astrology. He kept charts on all of his uh, clients. He never talked about it, but he ended up with this, and we picked up on this in the fact that these archetypes are found as patterns in sentient life that were recognized by biologists. Darcy Wentworth Thompson, who objected that what Darwin was doing was only the tip of the iceberg, and these archetypes or these patterns would lead to far greater things than what Darwin was talking about with evolution. There was Harold Burr at Yale, Richard Becker, who wrote The Body Electric That You Can Get, Michael Levin, who's now at Tufts, and Rupert Sheldrake, who talks about a morphogenic field. So the notion of archetypes, I think, will become more and more important over time, and we'll see. I expect Michael Levin will get a Nobel Prize in biology.
and it just shows the inherent mathematical nature of nature itself. of spirals, whether it's a galaxy or a snail, or a, a star or a cell. There's all these recurrent patterns that are just inherent in the math is there. It's as if the universe is written in math and geometry.
Yeah. Now, we go off and link up with Jung, who was living outside of Zurich, and Wolfgang Pauli, who received the Nobel Prize in Physics. They had an active set of interactions from 1930 to 1957, probably 80 different letters that are all collected in a book. And the reason for this was that Pauli was looking at these experiments in physics, and he couldn't begin to explain them. The most critical one was the so-called double slit experiment, which involves shooting electrons through a slit. They would hit a foil on the other side, and you'd see the electrons hitting this in a nice straight line, no surprises. But when you put two slits close together and you shot electrons at it, then it didn't end up with just two lines. You ended up with a whole interference pattern, which said that the electron had turned into a wave. And Pauli was completely dumbfounded by this. And as is physics today, Ron Cowan was able to observe this and could show what was actually going on. But this was the reason why Pauli approached Jung and said, look, you think outside the box. I want to explain these things to you, and let's see if we can come up with some explanations that might assist mathematical physics advancing. And so the outcome of this was synchronicity that Jung uh, used to describe circumstances that are meaningful related, but they appear to lack a causal connection. The example of this is Pauli himself, who, when he got close to any experiment, and many experimental physicists wanted Pauli to come. They wanted him to see their experiment so that he could get interested in it and help them develop better theoretical understanding. And Pauli would show up and the experiment would fail. He would get anywhere, literally the thing would collapse in front of your eyes. And, people were dumbfounded, and it was called the Pauli phenomenon. So the thing that it also refers to, though, is just these events. The events are Pauli walking into a lab and the lab having the experiment. They're causally unrelated to one another, and yet obviously Pauli makes the experiment fail. So there's some unknown connection here. Now, the thing to keep in mind here, what comes out of this is work that was done after they were interacting, which shows that time itself isn't what you think it is. So we have to take that into account.
And causality, therefore, is not what we
Right,
normally
right.
think.
Causality is not what you think it is either. So we mentioned before that there were two dimensions to time. Time has a real component and an imaginary component. And these go as follows. The real component, which is the one that we're involved with, the time of the space of matter, what happens is there's a completely consistent interpretation of quantum mechanics that permits free will, and it's called the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics. As you run along, every time there's a transition of any sort, electron changing energy levels anywhere, billions upon billions of these things occurring every second, you end up with a separate timeline. Each one of these will spring forth a separate timeline. So you end up having this free will, but it appears that your soul or your entity that is tied to you can shape these timelines, can make them coalesce, so that even though there's many timelines, you're really following one set of timelines that is what's going on, even though there's lots of little branches here. Now, that's all good for matter, that's fine. But there's this imaginary component of time, which is where your soul or the space of dark matter lives. And this leads to a picture up here showing these threads. These are called Akashic threads. Every soul has an Akashic thread that goes back through the entire history of the soul, all the different incarnations that occur to the soul. And so this is the ultimate, this is a holographic recording of your entire life, each of your lives that occurred there, and everything associated with it. And you end up with these two different things here. And the reason for bringing that up here is that you end up with a lot of anomalies occurring here, but you can access, for example, people have found these Akashic threads through hypnotic regression. You go into deep hypnosis, very deep hypnosis, and then you can link up with this, your soul, and with this thread that's there, and in fact go back and see what you had done in past lives. In fact, some people have gone forward in time to see what's going on, which leads to some interesting things.
And some people look at the time in between lifetimes.
Right? And what happened when after the incident after you died? What happened there in between those lifetimes? So this is all what we're going to be covering in here. This is accepted by most physicists here as the natural interpretation, but it leads to this notion of timelines, and we can have multiple timelines occurring, and we can shape these timelines. The example of this is that due to Nostradamus, who wrote looked into the future of these threads, and he saw three individuals, Napoleon, Hitler, and the Antichrist. And he said, this is not what I'm happy with, but I see this is the future that's coming, and I want people to study this. And by your actions, you can probably drive us away from that. So we did, in our timeline, we did encounter Napoleon, we did encounter Hitler, but the Antichrist has not yet shown up. That doesn't mean they can't show up tomorrow, but that something like this is going on. And that we have to believe that we could shape things so that we could avoid this Antichrist that ended up causing incredible misery in the world. So it goes. Then we turn back to the macrocosm, the telescopes and what they allow you to do. And this led to the discovery that after hundreds of years of observations with telescopes, that we've only been studying 5% of the energy and matter in the universe, and the other 95% is what we call dark. It's dark matter and it's dark energy. And cosmology studies the evolution, the picture of how everything started. One of the key things Ron Cowan observed, he went back in time to the start of our universe, and he saw that there was a big bounce. There wasn't a big fireball, there was a big bounce that occurred that started up our universe. But today there's a lot of discussions of this cosmic background microwave radiation that is viewed as being the remnants of the original explosion that caused our universe. Well, there's no doubt that this is there, but it was only 13.8 billion years ago. And it could be that our universe is actually much older than that. It could be 1 billion years old. But what happened 13.8 billion years ago? Probably our universe ran into another universe, and the collision created this cosmic background energy here. That's the best working conjecture that we have now. And the mystics out of Judaism have this notion of Tzimtzum to try and lead into this. Do you want to say anything about this?
We've got to lay this out better.
Your bath.
Here, I'll get this out of the way.
Yeah. So, we're gonna talk about this in symbolic terms, just to be able to talk about it. What we call God, or I like the Jewish tradition of referring to it as G blank D, to show that you're not referring to a personal God, a personification of God. That's idolatry, and that's really frowned upon. But this quote God began the process of creation by limiting the Or and Sof, the infinite light. I learned of that as the without end, which I like because it's kind of poetic. The without end of the Godhead contracted itself and withdrew itself from part of its area in order to allow for a conceptual space, which we call the vacated space, in order that we could have existence at all. This primordial initial contraction forming a vacated space. There's something wrong there. Into which new creative light could beam is denoted by general reference to the Tzimtzum. In Kabbalistic interpretation, Tzimtzum gives rise to the paradox of simultaneous divine presence and absence within the vacuum and resultant creation. So without that vacuum being created, there can't be anything. Various approaches exist as to how the paradox may be resolved and as to the nature of the Tzimtzum itself. So it's an attempt to articulate this paradoxical state of being and non-being at the same time.
Yeah, Ron observed this because he saw the everything had compacted, but if everything had compacted, then there was a void. Like, where is this? It's sitting there with this void, and then it started to expand, which created our universe and created many other universes as well in this expansion.
But in that illustration there, it's all full of all of this activity and essence and creation, but then as part of it is withdrawn, so that there's a space into which to create.
Right.
Because without that illusion of separation, it's understood that it's an illusion. Without that, everything is just the same jar of mayonnaise. You can't differentiate anything from anything else, and when everything is everything, it's all nothing really.
Right.
So in order to have any differentiation, you need to have that paradox,
Right.
conceptually. So Ron Cohn, under deep meditation, observed the start of our universe. I believe in the Hindu state that it's cyclical. It's always unfolding. It's always happening. Because time isn't the way we think of it as being. It's not linear. He observed the creation of matter and dark matter, including the Higgs bosons, which are these like spacer things.
Yeah, I asked him to look for these since he was doing this, and he saw both the matter and the dark matter Higgs boson, so that if the Higgs boson wasn't created, then there would be no mass of anything. But once they were created, that scaled the mass up for matter and for dark matter. Everything kicked in after that.
And that might really be what we think of as the Big Bang. Might
Yeah.
be that sudden inflation, that has more to do with the contraction.
Right. Yeah. He definitely didn't see any nuclear fireball. He was adamant about this. Just he saw space itself, these compartments of space that had been compressed. They expanded typically like 30 orders of magnitude in a blink. So,
And there was no explosion, but rather a bounce, a big bounce. Since there is cosmic background radiation, where did it come from? Did our universe smash into another universe 13.8 billion years ago? Then we just abruptly segue into astrology, tarot, and the I Ching. And this is something that Bart threw together quickly, and I don't even want to talk about tonight.
right, but you can see we have stuff on astrology.
I've done astrology for more than half my life at this point, which is about 35 years. And I would put it this way, the kind of astrology that I was trained in and learned to practice is synchronistic. So we don't believe it's causal, we believe it's happening at the same time. But again, causality is different from what we usually think it is. So, and I've done astrology I've done astrology longer than tarot, and then tarot really comes out of Kabbalah, which a lot of people don't believe, but it really is the same structure, and that's how it works. That's what it's describing, is the creative process described in Kabbalah. And when you do tarot, you're tapping into, you're getting an X-ray of that structural process. And it's not going to tell you what's going to happen next Thursday. It's definitely not going to do that, but it can show you tendencies and patterns. Um, and its real purpose is insight into the patterns and liberation from the patterns. Because there wouldn't be any point if it's just all written in stone, then why even participate? It's to learn, and that's kind of a spiral that we're always engaged in. Um, and
Yeah.
so just knowing what's going to happen, inevitably predicting it unchangeable events isn't, terribly interesting or worthwhile. I certainly wouldn't have spent 5 years studying it just to, see if it was valid just for that. It wasn't for the parlor trick of the prediction, which it could do a fair to middling job with, but it's for the creativity and the healing and the transformation that are possible with the greater insight.
And they're free tarot. You can draw tarot cards for free and judge for yourself. So that's all on the web.
The I Ching is, I think, probably the most profound divination system I've ever had anything to do with. That's where I go for my own deepest wisdom, because it's the least familiar. But it's yeah, so intricate. And it's not just randomly made up. This came out of but which Chinese system was it? The
The golden flower.
that was part of it, but the I can't think of it. My
Well,
brain.
Well, the different proteins that make up DNA and RNA
Right,
are encoded in this
right.
in these 64 hexagrams.
And it's the foundation of computer code. The simplest ones was called 64 hex, was combinations of yes and no, which are akin to yin and yang, or the pair. So you have the solid line and the broken line, and one is yes and one is no, and you combine those uh, in two sets of three, which is so a set of six. There could be 64 of them are possible. And the permutations are just a mind-boggling. The way it evolves, it's incredibly systematic, and the principles of nature that correspond to each one
So the
are
Chinese
have
emperors
so much.
were always had experts that were using I Ching to advise, what should I do?
And you get such a philosophical perspective. Um, I'm just drawing a blank on what I'm trying to think of, but it's incredibly profound and sophisticated and complicated. And I think it gives you incredible insight into human nature, your own nature, your own unconscious, your own um, desires and growth. But it's really the point of all of these things is the wisdom that can
Yeah.
come.
Then we have labyrinths. This is a picture of a labyrinth in Chartres Cathedral, but it's found everywhere.
Why don't you move that out of the way?
Move this out of the way. Labyrinths are found on all continents and all ages of history. So clearly, someone thinks they're important wherever you go on planet Earth. Some people view this as a form of walking meditation, a pathway for stress reduction, self-reflection. You integrate the mind, the body, and the spirit to achieve inner peace, wholeness, and so forth.
This image here, whoops, is 36 feet across. And this was built in Chartres Cathedral in the year, was it?
Like 1300, something like that.
1301, I think it was. And the marble was hauled there to Chartres, which is north of Paris, from Wales. It was very, very specific blue marble in Wales that they had to bring there. There were no locomotives or anything. They had to drag it there with horses across, this terrain to get it there, mix it with this white marble, and create this imprint that these were made for, millions of years, and usually in a transient form. Just like with a stick carved in sand. But they made this, was a huge effort to haul this all this way across Wales and England to bring it to France, and then bang it into this construct in this enormous cathedral. And this was, the center of the nave of the cross. Why were they doing it? It was a spiritual technology is why. And they felt it was energetically very important. They were outdoors until this point in history, and they were really considered to be the province of the goddess. And I would say Chartres was as well. It was really to Mary. And it was incredibly important to them. That was a huge amount of effort to expend. That was like building the pyramids in Egypt. Why were they going to all this trouble for people to walk in circles if it didn't do anything, if it didn't
Right.
have any kind of energetic effect, which I would say is profound. I think it changes you for life.
And just again, the labyrinth, there's one way in and one way out, whereas a maze can have lots of dead ends in. So this is a labyrinth. So then we summarize everything here at the end. But the end of it is that it's really mysticism that is at the intersection of all of these things. And that really just takes us back to where we started from. That it looks like there was a spirituality in times past that was really an integral part of daily life. And so daily life had balanced spirituality against materialism. And this path, this way, was based on love for yourself, which in turn led to love for your neighbor. And this way was a part of the collective unconscious that's throughout the entire universe that links each of us. Each of us is a piece of this entity, and in that way we're linked to one another. And so this way is really a sharing of love, compassion, joy, honesty, integrity, the male and female, and then constant change, constant evolution. That's our takeaway in this. So with that, that's what we're going to cover this year, and we're now done
With the
with
introduction.
the overview introduction. So you can go to the website and we'll take it from there. So, Bruce,
You've been with us for years.
yeah. So Bruce has been through the whole thing. We've been through the whole thing. So stay with us and you'll see more and more as we learn, as we evolve. The syllabus really hasn't changed, but the emphasis that we place on different things has changed. So,
And we're finding more really good materials
yeah,
that
Well-
other people are creating.
yeah. The YouTube is incredible for
Yeah.
what's out there now. So we'll draw on that as we get into it. So thank you. We'll see everybody next week. Have a wonderful. Bye-bye.
Welcome back.
Yep. Year 6.